Day 427. The scope's crosshairs found him again at 0547 hours, just as the sun
Target
broke over the
confirmed,
ridgeline
300
in
meters
eastern
right.
Siberia.
Copy, firing.
Elise had been lying in the
Impact,
same
good hit.
position for 11
Refiring.
hours. The cold had
Stay with
stopped
me. I'm
registering
applying
somewhere
pressure.
around hour 3.
Perimeter secure.
Pain
Moving
became
me back.
data.
Can you stand?
Discomfort became background
Stay
noise.
with me.
All
Where
that
does it
mattered
hurt?
was the glass,
My
the
leg,
distance, and the
bleeding.
man
Up
moving
here.
through
What
it.
do you need?
Pressure,
Voss.
please.
She
Got it.
watched him through the thermal overlay, his heat signature, a bright bloom against the frozen landscape. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed he was alone. That confidence would kill him. Eventually, when she decided it was time. Not today. Today was about learning. 14 months of learning. 427 days of watching a ghost move through the world, killing with her signature, stealing her legend, and leaving her to take the blame while someone very powerful made sure the world kept looking the wrong way. Elise shifted her weight by millimeters. The ghillie suit rustled like dead leaves. Voss was 800 meters out, moving northeast along a game trail she had marked on her 4th day tracking him. He always used the same routes. That was his weakness. Patterns. The man was brilliant at 1,000 meters with a rifle in his hands, but he thought like a machine, predictable, methodical, convinced that precision was the same as invisibility. He was wrong. She watched him stop, scan the terrain, then continue. 43 seconds, the same timing he always used. She had documented it 17 times across 4 countries. Prague, Berlin, Stockholm, and now here in the killing cold of Siberian, nowhere where the contract had finally brought them both. Her radio earpiece crackled. She didn't move. The signal was dead air, just the hiss of encrypted silence that told her the network was still active, still listening, still waiting for her to report something she would never report because the network itself was compromised. That was the thing about betrayal. Once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. And Elise had seen it clearly 6 months ago, when she cross-referenced the kill reports and realized that 6 of the 14 assassinations attributed to Orchid to her had happened while she was in Berlin running an entirely different operation. Someone was using her call sign, someone was working her pattern, and someone very high up was making sure the intelligence pipeline kept pointing at her instead of at him. Voss disappeared over the ridge. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. Her fingers found the small notebook in her chest pocket. Waterproof, reinforced, filled with 427 days of data. Movement patterns, timing intervals, behavioral tics. The science of watching a man who thought he was invisible until he became more visible than anyone else on Earth. Because that was what Elise did. She made ghosts real, and then she made them disappear. She closed the notebook, secured it back in the pocket over her heart, and began the long, cold process of extracting from her hide site. 48 hours from now, everything would change. She could feel it in the way Voss had moved this morning, in the small adjustments to his routine, in the tightening of the operational window that had been closing slowly for weeks. The contract was almost complete. His contract, not hers. And when it finished, when he finally took the shot, he had been maneuvered into position to take. That would be the moment. Not before, because Elise needed him to pull the trigger first. She needed the proof. She needed the world to see what she had seen. That Voss was the weapon, and someone else was holding the trigger. She moved through the snow like a shadow, leaving no trace, heading back to the equipment cache she had buried 3 kilometers south. The rifle stayed strapped across her back, 43 pounds of custom precision that had become an extension of her body over the years. She didn't need to look at it to know its condition. She knew every scratch, every imperfection, every microscopic adjustment she had made to turn it from a tool into something more. A promise. The kind of promise you make when 14 months of your life disappear into snow and silence and watching, and the only thing waiting at the end is the certainty that someone very powerful wants you dead and is willing to burn the entire intelligence apparatus to make it happen. Her boots found solid ground. The tree line opened ahead, and Elise allowed herself one thought that wasn't tactical, wasn't calculated, wasn't part of the plan. 48 hours, then this ends. She was wrong about the timing. It ended in 36. The bullet hit her from the east at 13:47 hours 2 days later. She was in position, prone, watching Voss settle into his final hide site for what she knew was his contracted kill. A target she had identified 3 days prior, a Russian military intelligence officer who had made the mistake of asking questions about financial transfers between Prague and Moscow, questions that led back to names that couldn't afford scrutiny. Voss was there to silence those questions. Elise was there to document it. And someone else, someone she hadn't seen, hadn't tracked, hadn't accounted for in 429 days of operational planning, was there to silence her. The impact felt like physics, like a law of nature expressing itself through her body. The bullet entered below her right shoulder blade, angled down, and exited through the lower rib cage, taking bone with it. She didn't hear the shot. Sound traveled slower than metal. By the time her brain registered what had happened, she was already face down in the snow, the rifle knocked from her grip. Her right arm extended forward in an involuntary reach for the weapon that was suddenly impossibly 3 feet away. Her first thought wasn't pain. It was he knew. Voss had known she was here. Had known for how long she couldn't calculate, but long enough to set this up to position a second shooter to turn the hunt around on her while she had been so focused on watching him that she had forgotten the oldest rule of this kind of work. Always assume you're the target. Her second thought was movement. Get to the rifle. Her body didn't respond correctly. The neurological signals fired, but the damage interrupted the connection between intent and action. Her right side was compromised. Blood was spreading beneath her warm against the frozen ground, and her fingers were 3 feet from the rifle grip, and closing that distance felt like trying to move a mountain. She heard boots in the snow. Not close, maybe 30 meters. Moving carefully. Someone checking their work. Elise forced her left arm underneath her body, pushed and managed to shift her weight by inches. The pain arrived, then arriving late to the situation like a guest who hadn't been invited but intended to stay. It bloomed from the exit wound outward, radiating through her chest and back. And for a moment, just a moment, her vision grayed at the edges. She blinked it back. The boots were closer, 20 meters. Her fingers touched the rifle stock. A voice, male, accent she recognized, German but educated abroad, probably England. The kind of voice that belonged to someone who had learned to kill in institutions that didn't officially exist. Voss. I underestimated you, he said. He wasn't talking to her. He was talking to himself, processing, working through the operational debrief in real time. 430 days. Impressive. Most people I've tracked lasted maybe 40. 15 meters. Elise's fingers closed around the rifle grip. She couldn't lift it, couldn't bring it to bear. But she could hold it, and holding it meant that the thing she had carried for 14 months wasn't lost, wasn't abandoned in the snow. While Voss walked away and she bled out, and the entire conspiracy stayed buried. You cost me time, Voss continued. His boots stopped. 10 meters, maybe less. Cost me operational flexibility. Had to move assets, reroute communications. Bring in cleaners I didn't want to use. All because you couldn't let it go. Couldn't let it go. The words settled over her like the cold. 8 sanctioned kills. 8 targets she had eliminated because someone in the chain of command had determined they were threats to national security. 8 operations she had executed perfectly professionally, and then discovered that 6 additional kills she hadn't made, had been attributed to her call sign to Orchid, while she was somewhere else entirely. 6 murders, and Voss had pulled every trigger. The intelligent thing, Voss said, and she could hear him moving again, circling, staying out of her limited field of vision, would have been to report it. Go through channels, file the discrepancy, let the system sort itself out. He laughed. It was a dry sound, empty of humor. But you didn't. You went dark, started tracking me, and that told me something important. It told me you knew. 5 meters. Elise's breathing was shallow, controlled. Blood loss was calculating itself in her peripheral awareness. A countdown her body was running without conscious input. Minutes, not hours. She had minutes. You knew the channel was the problem, Voss said. Knew that whoever was running me had access to your operational reports, your call sign, your signature. Knew that reporting it would just tell them you were aware. So you did the only thing that made sense. His boots appeared at the edge of her vision. Black tactical, unmarked, the kind you bought in bulk through contractors who didn't ask questions. You decided to finish it yourself. He crouched down. She still couldn't see his face, but she could see his hands. Gloved, steady, the hands of someone who had done this many times and would do it many times more. I respect that, he said quietly. I want you to know that. Professionally, I respect it. You're better than most of the people they send after me. Better than most of the people I've worked with. Under different circumstances, we might have been colleagues. He stood. But I have a schedule to keep, and you're behind it by about 90 seconds. The boots moved away, heading north. Back toward his hide site, back toward the Russian intelligence officer who was going to die in approximately 4 minutes and whose death would be attributed to Orchid, to Elise, because that was how this worked. Voss killed them. She took the blame. And someone very powerful stayed very protected. She heard him stop 20 meters out. There's a team coming, he called back. American. SEALs probably. They're being sent to neutralize Orchid. Should be here in maybe 6 hours. If you're very lucky, they'll find you before you bleed out. If you're very unlucky, they'll find you alive. A pause. Either way, this ends today. Goodbye, Elise. The sound of his boots faded into the distance. She was alone. Face down in the Siberian snow, blood spreading beneath her like a dark halo. The rifle in her left hand and 14 months of documentation in the pocket over her failing heart. Alone. Except she wasn't. Because Voss had made one mistake. Just one. And it was the kind of mistake that men like him always made eventually, when they got good enough and confident enough and insulated enough to believe that their own competence was the same thing as invincibility. He had left her alive. He had left her alive because he needed an audience. Because killing her in secret in the snow where no one would find her for weeks or months, that didn't serve the purpose. But leaving her here wounded, dying for an American SEAL team to find and identify and report back through the chain of command that Orchid had been neutralized, that served it perfectly. He needed witnesses. He needed the story to be told. And that meant he had given her something he shouldn't have. Time. Not much. Her body was keeping a very accurate count, and the numbers were bad. But enough, maybe enough. Elise focused on her breathing. Slow, controlled, conserving oxygen, conserving everything. The pain was enormous now, filling her awareness, but pain was just information, data about damage. And damage could be managed if you understood the parameters. She had maybe 30 minutes before blood loss pushed her into unconsciousness. She had maybe 60 before it pushed her past the point where medical intervention could bring her back. Somewhere in that window, the SEAL team would arrive. And when they did, when they found her, when they made the decision about whether she was a threat or a witness, that would determine everything. Because in the pocket over her heart, beneath the ghillie suit and the tactical vest, and the 14 months of cold and watching and waiting, there was a drive. A field drive, smaller than her thumb, containing every piece of documentation she had compiled. Every name, every payment, every kill. The full architecture of the conspiracy that had turned her into a ghost and Voss into a weapon, and someone very powerful into someone who needed them both dead. The drive was everything. The rifle was proof, and she was the only person left alive who knew how to connect them. Her vision was fading at the edges again. She blinked hard, forced focus, and used her left arm to pull her body forward by inches, dragging herself and the rifle toward a shallow depression in the snow 10 meters ahead. It wasn't cover, wasn't shelter, but it was something other than the open ground where Voss had left her to die. It took her 8 minutes to cover 10 meters. By the time she reached the depression and rolled herself into it, her breathing was ragged and her pulse was doing things that would have alarmed a cardiologist. But she was there, in a place where someone looking might see her, in a place where thermal signatures would read differently, in a place where, if she was very lucky and the universe decided to balance the scales just slightly, an American SEAL team might find her before her body gave up entirely. She settled the rifle alongside her, keeping her left hand wrapped around the grip. Muscle memory, the kind that doesn't switch off with consciousness. And then, because there was nothing else to do and no more moves to make, Elise closed her eyes and focused on the sound of her own breathing and the feeling of the cold working its way through her body and the single thought that had kept her alive for 14 months of hell. Finish it. Whatever it costs, finish it. The sound that woke her wasn't boots, it was voices. American. Accents she recognized from briefings and joint operations and the complicated machinery of military collaboration that happened in shadows and never made it into official reports. She didn't open her eyes. Not yet. She listened. 3 voices, maybe 4. Hard to tell with the way sound carried in the cold. They were talking in the shorthand of people who had worked together long enough that full sentences were unnecessary. Blood trail. Fresh. How fresh? Hour, maybe less. She's close. She. Intel said Orchid might be female. Unconfirmed. A pause, then a different voice, deeper, carrying authority without raising volume. Spread out. Wide perimeter. Weapons hot. If she's wounded, she's dangerous. If she's not wounded, she's more dangerous. Bootsteps. Multiple directions. Professional movement, the kind that came from training, that had been reinforced by experience in places where mistakes were measured in body bags. Elise kept her breathing shallow, kept her hand on the rifle and waited. The first one to reach her was careful. She heard him approach from the south, moving slowly, and she knew without looking that he had his weapon up and was scanning for threats before committing to proximity. She felt him stop 3 feet away. A long pause. Then quietly into a radio. Boss, 6 o'clock, 30 meters. I've got her. The response was immediate, low and controlled status. Face down, not moving. There's blood. A lot of it. Weapon, rifle, custom rig. She's still holding it. Another pause longer this time. Then the authority voice again closer now. Everyone hold position. I'm coming to you. 40 seconds of silence. Then boots beside her, 2 sets. She heard someone kneel, heard the rustle of tactical gear, and then she felt fingers on her wrist pressing gently, searching for a pulse. The fingers found it. Faint, irregular, wrong. But there. She heard the authority voice directly above her, now speaking to someone else. She's alive. Get the kit. Boss, get the kit, Mackenzie, now. More boot steps, fast. And then hands were on her, rolling her carefully onto her side, and Elise let them, because she had made a calculation in the seconds between hearing the voices and feeling the fingers on her wrist. These men had been sent to kill her, but they hadn't killed her yet. That meant something. She opened her eyes. The first face she saw was close, maybe 2 feet away. Male, late 30s. Eyes that had seen things and filed them away in categories that probably didn't include finding a target alive when the target was supposed to be a ghost. He was looking at her the way you look at something that doesn't make sense yet, but will eventually if you give it enough attention. You're with friendlies, he said. His voice was the authority voice, calm, professional, the kind of voice that had talked people through bad situations before. U.S. Navy, you've been shot. We're getting you out. Elise tried to speak. Her throat didn't cooperate immediately. She forced it, pushing past the damage, past the blood loss, past everything that was telling her body to shut down and conserve what little it had left. One word came out. East. The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A shift. Recognition that she was conscious, aware, and trying to communicate something. Behind him, another man appeared, younger, medic kit in his hands. He was already moving professional and fast, setting up for field trauma response. The authority voice stayed focused on her. East Ridge, she managed. Her voice was hoarse, effortful, but the words were there. He's been there for 6 hours. The man processed that. She watched him do it, watched the tactical assessment running behind his eyes. We have eyes on the 11 o'clock ridge, he said. Single figure. That's not him. She had to pause to breathe. Even that cost something. That's bait. He puts a thermal decoy at 1800 to pull your attention. He's east. Closer. Maybe 800. The silence that followed lasted maybe a second, but it felt much longer. Then the authority voice was speaking into his radio voice, flat and controlled. Thornfield, East Ridge, now. A response crackled back. Already scanning. Stand by. Stand by, the medic was working on her. She felt pressure on the wound, felt the sharp bite of a tourniquet being applied somewhere that hurt, felt hands moving with practiced efficiency across damage that should have killed her an hour ago. The radio crackled again. Contact, East Ridge, prone figure. I missed him. He's already... The crack of the shot reached them, the same moment the snow 2 feet from the medic's left knee exploded upward. Everyone moved. The medic threw himself over her reflex, and the authority voice went right hard and low. And somewhere in the chaos, Elise heard shouting and return fire, and the specific kind of controlled panic that happens when professionals realize they're in a situation that just changed parameters. Cease fire. The authority voice cut through everything. You're wasting rounds on a target you haven't identified. Cease fire. The shooting stopped. The silence that followed was immediate and terrible. Elise, pinned under the medic, forced words past the weight and the pain. Warning shot, she said. He's hurting you. The medic shifted, looked down at her with an expression that was equal parts professional concern and pure disbelief. He just tried to kill me. No. Elise held his gaze. He tried to scare you. If he wanted you dead, you'd be dead. He's moving you. Wants you to run. The authority voice was back, crouching beside them. He's done this before, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. To you, yes. His eyes hadn't moved from her face. She could see him processing, calculating, making decisions in real time that would determine whether the next 5 minutes ended with everyone alive or everyone dead. He shot you, the man said. Left you here. Why? Elise paused to breathe, to conserve, to measure every word because words were expensive now and she didn't have many left. Same reason he didn't kill your man just now. He needs an audience. He needs people to see. See what he thinks nobody else can do. The man looked at her for another moment. Then he made a decision. We don't run, he said, speaking to his team now, not to her. We hold this position. Moving targets at 800 in this visibility, he can pick us apart. Stationary, we have cover. From somewhere above them, another voice, "Boss, we still can't hit him at 800 with what we're carrying." "I know." The authority voice turned back to Elise. "Your name?" A pause, then quietly, "Elise. How bad is the pain right now?" "Manageable." The medic made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. The authority voice kept his eyes on hers. "You know where he is?" "I know where he'll be. In about 4 minutes, he'll move to his secondary position. He always does." He thinks it's unpredictable. Something that might have been contempt crossed her face. "It isn't." The man crouched lower until he was level with her. "What do you need?" Elise looked at him steadily, at the face of a man who had been sent to kill her and was now, for reasons she would think about later if there was a later, asking her what she needed to kill someone else. The universe had a sense of irony. She appreciated that. "Help me sit up," she said. "And then, don't get in my way." They got her upright between the two of them. The authority voice, whose name she still didn't know, and the medic Mackenzie, who kept muttering under his breath about spinal protocols and field trauma guidelines that were being comprehensively violated. Elise made no sound. The absence of sound was deliberate. Pain was information, and information could be managed, but vocalization was weakness, and weakness was something Voss would hear even at 800 meters, even through snow and wind, and the specific silence of a killing ground. She wouldn't give him that. The rifle came across her lap, 43 pounds of custom precision engineering that she knew better than she knew her own heartbeat. Her hands moved over it automatically, checking the chamber, confirming the load, running diagnostics that lived below conscious thought in the place where training and repetition and 14 months of cold had built something that functioned independent of whether her body was intact or failing. The scope needed adjustment. She made it by fractions, compensating for the angle change now that she was upright instead of prone. Her breathing had shifted. That changed everything. Changed. Bullet trajectory at a distance was a calculation that included the shooter's respiratory pattern. Prone, she could control it absolutely. Sitting wounded with a sucking chest wound that Mackenzie had packed but not sealed, her breathing was shallower, faster, less predictable. She would have to account for that. The wind had shifted too. She felt it on her face, process the data without instruments, because instruments were for people who hadn't spent 14 months learning to read weather as a language, 2 degrees west of where it had been when Voss shot her. Not dramatic, but real. At 4,000 meters, 2 degrees was everything. 4,543 meters, she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. The radio crackled. The voice called Thornfield, the Overwatch specialist who had spotted Voss on the East Ridge. "Say again." "That's the distance to his final position," Elise said. "The one he'll move to when he's done repositioning. He goes there when he thinks it's over, when he thinks he's won." The silence that followed had weight. She heard someone, Mackenzie, probably mutter something under his breath. Heard another voice go completely quiet in the particular way that meant whoever it was had stopped being capable of speech. 4,543 meters was not a distance that appeared in field operations. It was theoretical, the kind of number that existed in controlled facilities on paper in arguments between engineers who had never pulled a trigger outside of a range. It was not a number that happened in the dark, in the cold, in 31 degrees below zero, in a body that was bleeding through packed gauze and running on reserves that had been depleted 40 minutes ago. But it was the number. And Elise had known it for 6 weeks since the day she had identified Voss's final position and calculated the distance and understood with absolute clarity that if it came to this, if it came to a moment where everything collapsed down to a single shot, this would be the geometry. 4,543 meters. Impossible. Unless you had spent 14 months making the impossible the only option left. The authority voice was watching her. She could feel his attention even though her eyes were on the scope, on the calculations running through her mind, on the wind and the cold, and the specific quality of light that meant visibility was marginal and getting worse. "That's not," Thornfield's voice started over the radio. "I know what it is," Elise said. She settled the rifle, adjusted her position by degrees. Every movement was structural damage assessment, knowing exactly which motions were permissible and which would cost her consciousness. The pain had been moved somewhere, not gone, just relocated to a space that didn't interfere with the mechanics of what came next. 14 months. It had been 14 months since she discovered that someone was stealing her kills, her signature, her legend. 14 months since she made the decision that reporting it through channels would be suicide because the channels themselves were compromised. 14 months since she went dark and started tracking Voss across 4 countries and 17 cities and uncounted kilometers of frozen nowhere. 14 months of cold, of watching, of learning a man's patterns down to the second, down to the heartbeat, down to the specific rhythm of his breathing when he thought he was alone. She had watched him for so long that she knew him better than he knew himself. Knew that he would cross the open stretch in 4 seconds because he always crossed in 4. Knew that he would settle for 90 seconds before taking his next shot because 90 seconds was his ritual, his certainty, his belief that patience was the same thing as control. Knew that when he moved to the final position, he would think he was unpredictable, unreachable, safe. He was wrong. Her breathing changed, slowed. The pain was still there, enormous and insistent, but it had become background radiation, present but not relevant. Her body had moved into a state she had trained for years to access and could hold for maybe 5 minutes before everything shut down. 5 minutes. She needed 4. The authority voice spoke quietly beside her. My name is Bradstone, Lieutenant Commander Daniel Bradstone. If this goes wrong, I need you to know who tried to help you. Elise glanced at him, brief, direct. It won't go wrong. You can't know that. I've known it for 14 months. She turned back to the scope. Bradstone was silent for a moment. Then your team. They didn't have to do any of it. After we pulled you out of that snow, we could have called it in and walked away. I know. Then you know we're choosing this. Choosing you. Elise felt something shift in her chest, not the wound, something else. Something that didn't have a tactical designation. Why, she asked. Bradstone looked out at the dark ridge line. Because the mission was wrong, he said, and you're fixing it. 4 minutes until Voss moved. The team was positioned around her now, not crowding but present. Thornfield somewhere high with optics on the east ridge. Mackenzie close, ready to respond if she collapsed. The others, names she didn't know yet, forming a perimeter that wouldn't stop Voss's bullet, but might stop everything else. They were protecting her. These men who had been sent to kill her were now standing between her and the world. The universe's sense of irony was getting pronounced. 3 minutes. She ran the calculations again. Distance, wind, temperature, altitude, the Coriolis effect of the Earth's rotation, the specific ballistic coefficient of the round she was chambering. The mathematics were complex, but she didn't think them consciously anymore. They happened in parallel processing background computation, while her conscious mind focused on breathing and stillness and the small adjustments that would make the difference between impact and miss. At 4,000 meters, a single degree of barrel angle translated to 40 meters of deviation at target. She had maybe a 3-meter margin of error, less than 1 degree of tolerance. The rifle settled into position. She made a micro adjustment. Felt it lock. 2 minutes. I need you to understand something, she said. Bradstone looked at her. If I miss, he will not miss. Your men need to be ready to move the moment I take the shot, not after. The moment. Where do we go? Northwest. There's a rock shelf at 40 meters. It won't give you angle on his position, but it breaks his sight line to this depression. She glanced at him again, brief and direct. I won't miss, but I need your men moving. Bradstone keyed his radio. On the shot northwest 40 meters, rock shelf. Move fast, stay low. Thornfield, you hold your position until I call it. A chorus of acknowledgments came back. Elise turned back to the scope. 1 minute, 30 seconds. The world narrowed. Everything outside the geometry of the shot began to fall away. The cold receded. The pain receded. The voices around her became distant, present, but muffled as if she were hearing them through water. There was only the scope, the distance, the wind on her face, and the knowledge built over 14 months of watching that, in approximately 90 seconds, a man named Voss would move into position on a ridge 4,543 meters away and settle himself with the confidence of someone who believed he had already won. 1 minute, her breathing slowed further. 4 breaths per minute now, deep and controlled. She was inside the shot, already inside the mathematics of it, inside the space between trigger and target, where time behaved differently, and the only thing that mattered was the purity of the execution. 45 seconds. Mackenzie had one hand resting near her shoulder. Not touching, just near. The way you position yourself next to something fragile and irreplaceable. Someone else, she thought it might be the one Bradstone had called Holt, had stopped pretending to watch his sector. They were all watching her now, waiting. 30 seconds. The wind shifted again. Subtle, a fraction of change. She registered it, adjusted a rotation of the scope dial so small it was almost invisible. A minute redistribution of the rifle's weight that changed her body angle by millimeters. At 4,000 meters, millimeters were everything. 15 seconds. Thornfield's voice came through the radio, barely a whisper. Movement. He's crossing the open stretch. Elise didn't respond. She was counting in her head. Voss would cross in 4 seconds. He always crossed in war. 1, 2, 3, 4. He's gone prone, Thornfield said. He's at the secondary. The secondary position, 4,543 meters away, exactly where she knew he would be. 90 seconds until he took his next shot. 90 seconds of ritual settling time that Voss believed made him unpredictable, but actually made him the most predictable thing in her entire operational landscape. She had 90 seconds. She would need 5. Her finger found the trigger. Familiar. The pressure required was something she knew in her bones, in her muscle memory, in the part of her that had pulled this trigger so many times that the weapon had stopped being separate from her body. 60 seconds. She exhaled. Halfway. Held it. The world stopped. There was no wind, no cold, no wound, no blood, no 14 months, no conspiracy, no Voss, no Bradstone, no team, no Siberia. There was only the mathematics, the geometry, the single perfect line between where she was and where he was, and the certainty, absolute and complete, that she had spent 14 months of her life learning to draw that line. 45 seconds. The scope showed her nothing. At this distance, even the best optics couldn't resolve a human figure. She was aiming at coordinates, at a position in space she had memorized, at a place where a man was settling himself with 90 seconds of patience that he thought made him safe. 30 seconds. Her heartbeat slowed. 40 beats per minute, 38, 35. She was between heartbeats now, in the space where the body's own rhythm wouldn't disturb the rifle. 15 seconds. She thought about the 8 sanctioned kills, the ones she had made. Clean, professional, necessary. She thought about the 6 stolen kills, the ones attributed to her while Voss pulled the triggers and someone very powerful made sure the world blamed Orchid. She thought about 429 days in the cold. 10 seconds. She thought about the drive in her chest pocket, the documentation, the names, the proof. She thought about Bradstone asking her what she needed and actually meaning it. 5 seconds. She thought about Voss leaving her in the snow because he needed an audience. He had his audience now. 3 seconds. She thought about the woman she had been 14 months ago, before any of this, before the discovery, before the decision to go dark and track a ghost across half the world. That woman was gone. 1 second. This woman pulled the trigger. The rifle's report was enormous. Immediate, a physical force that translated through her body and into the ground, and then was gone, swallowed by distance, by cold, by the specific silence of a wilderness that did not acknowledge what happened inside it. Elise didn't watch the scope. She was already moving or trying to move, but her body had used everything it had left to make the shot, and there was nothing remaining for the aftermath. She felt herself tilting, felt Mackenzie's hands catching her, lowering her back down, with the practiced care of someone who understood that she had just done something that should have been impossible, and her body was now presenting the bill. Around her, the team was moving. Northwest toward the rock shelf, fast and low exactly as Bradstone had ordered. She heard Thornfield's voice over the radio, distant, compressed. Confirm. Target down. Target is down. I have a confirmed fall on the secondary ridge. He's down. The words arrived like they were traveling through water. Target down. Elise closed her eyes. 14 months. It was done. The next thing she remembered clearly was Bradstone's face above her asking if she was still with them. She tried to answer, but her throat didn't cooperate. The world was fading at the edges, graying out in a way that she recognized from field trauma training as her body beginning the shutdown process. Blood loss, shock, system failure, the technical terms for dying. Mackenzie was working on her again. She felt pressure, felt movement, felt the sharp chemical bite of something being injected that was probably a stimulant to keep her heart from giving up entirely. Stay with us, Mackenzie was saying. Come on, stay with us. She wanted to tell him that she was trying, that she had been trying for 14 months, and she was very tired now. And maybe it was okay to stop, but the words wouldn't form, and her vision was telescoping down to a narrow tunnel, and at the end of that tunnel was Bradstone's face. He was saying something. She couldn't hear it. The tunnel collapsed. Everything went dark. She woke in pieces. First sound, a rhythmic thumping that she identified after several seconds as helicopter rotors. The sound was close immediate, which meant she was inside the aircraft. Second sensation, cold but less cold than before. Something wrapped around her. Thermal blanket probably. and pressure on her chest. Bandages, professional wrapping that felt different from Mackenzie's fieldwork. Third awareness, she was alive. That was unexpected. Fourth, pain. It arrived all at once, a comprehensive inventory of damage that her body had been suppressing during the shot and was now reporting in full detail. Broken rib, punctured lung, massive tissue trauma, blood loss that should have been fatal. Should have been. Wasn't. She opened her eyes. The interior of the helicopter was dim. Red light, the kind they used for night operations to preserve vision. She was on a litter strapped down IV line running to her arm. Mackenzie was beside her monitoring equipment she couldn't see clearly. Across from her, Bradstone. He was watching her with the expression of someone who had been waiting for her to wake up and wasn't entirely sure she would. Clear, she managed to ask. Her voice was barely audible over the rotors. Clear, Bradstone said. Thornfield confirmed the fall. You got him. Something passed across her face. Not relief exactly. More like a door closing on a room that had been left open too long. How long before extraction? She asked. We're already extracted, in the air now. 40 minutes to base, maybe less if the weather holds. Weather won't hold, she said. Figure 60. Mackenzie looked up from whatever he was monitoring. She's right, he said to Bradstone. Front moving in from the east. We'll hit headwinds in about 20 minutes. Bradstone studied her. What do I call you other than Elise? Elise is fine. Elise what? The pause was long enough to be its own answer. Does it matter right now? Not for the extraction. Maybe later. Later, she agreed. She closed her eyes again. Not from exhaustion, though that was present. From calculation. Because now that the immediate crisis was past, now that Voss was dead, and she was somehow alive, the second phase of the problem was beginning. The phase where Bradstone and his team would have to report what happened. And what happened did not match the mission they had been given. They had been sent to neutralize Orchid. Orchid had just saved their lives and eliminated the actual threat. Someone very powerful had sent them after the wrong target, and that someone was going to have questions. Bradstone, she said, eyes still closed. Yeah. When we land, there's going to be problems. I know. They're going to want to take me. Transfer me somewhere before you can do anything about it. Was silence. Then who's they? Whoever sent you after me in the first place. Whoever built the file that made Orchid look like the threat instead of the witness. She opened her eyes again. Looked directly at him. There's a drive in my vest, chest pocket, 14 months of documentation. Everything I found about Voss, about who was running him, about the program. Bradstone's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. What program? The one that's been using contractors for unsanctioned kills and covering it by attributing the work to official operators like me. The one that has protection at levels you probably don't want to think about. She paused to breathe. Even that was difficult. That drive is the only proof. If it disappears, I'm just a body they found in the snow. Another casualty, easily explained. Bradstone looked at Mackenzie. Some kind of silent communication passed between them. Then Bradstone reached over and carefully extracted the drive from her vest pocket. It was smaller than his thumb, unremarkable, the kind of thing you could lose in a cargo pocket and not notice for days. He held it up to the red light. That. He closed his fist around it. I'll keep it safe. They'll ask for it. They'll use protocol ordnance review evidence chains. They'll make it sound reasonable. Let them ask. Something in his voice made her look at him more carefully. This was a man who had made a decision. Not in the moment. Earlier. Maybe when he found her in the snow. Maybe when she warned them about Voss. Maybe during the shot. But somewhere along the line, Lieutenant Commander Daniel Bradstone had stopped following the mission he'd been given and started following something else. Whatever that something was, it included keeping her alive and keeping the drive safe. Why, she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Because the mission was wrong, he said finally, and you fixed it. That means something. The helicopter shuddered as it hit the headwinds Elise had predicted. Mackenzie adjusted something on the IV line and muttered about flight medic protocols that weren't designed for this kind of trauma case. Elise let her eyes close again. 60 minutes to base. And then the real fight would start. But for right now, for these 60 minutes, she could rest. Because for the first time in 14 months, someone else was standing to watch. Someone else was carrying the weight. And Voss was dead. The door had finally closed. The base at Krasnovarsk was not designed for ambiguity. Everything about it, the prefab walls, the fluorescent lighting that turned everyone slightly yellow, the smell of diesel fuel and instant coffee that had soaked into the structure over years of occupation, had been built for clear categories. Friendly, hostile, asset, liability. The people who ran the base understood those categories the way career military understood ranks and chains of command. They did not have a good category for what arrived on Bradstone's helicopter at 0617 hours. The flight surgeon who met them at the landing pad took one look at Elise and started calling for blood type confirmation before the rotors had stopped turning. Mackenzie had kept her stable for the full flight, but stable was a relative term. She had lost consciousness twice more and regained it twice more, and her blood pressure was holding at a number the surgeon described privately to Bradstone as technically incompatible with someone who just did what you're telling me she did. They took her into the medical wing on a gurney. Bradstone was not allowed to follow. That was the first wall. The second wall appeared 4 minutes later in the form of a major whose name Bradstone didn't catch, and whose rank insignia suggested he was the kind of officer who had been stationed at a forward base long enough to develop a very specific relationship with his own authority. Lieutenant Commander. The major stopped him in the corridor outside the medical wing with the practiced positioning of someone who had done this before. Not blocking exactly, just occupying enough space that stopping felt natural. I'm going to need a full debrief immediately. My team needs rest. Your team is being handled. I need you now. Bradstone looked at the door to the medical wing, looked at the major, made a calculation. 15 minutes, he said. Now, Lieutenant Commander. 15 minutes, Major. He said it the way you say something you've already decided is final, and he walked back to the medical wing door and pushed through it before the major had processed whether to escalate. The surgeon was working fast with two nurses moving around him in the choreography of people who had trained for exactly this scenario more times than they wanted to remember. Elise was conscious. That was the first thing Bradstone registered. Her eyes were open, and she was watching the surgeon work on her with the same detached assessment she'd used for everything else. You shouldn't be in here, the surgeon said without looking up. I know, Bradstone said and stayed. The surgeon glanced at him, once seemed to make a decision, and went back to work. She needs surgery. I can stabilize her here, but the wound management your medic did in the field bought her time. It didn't close anything. She needs a theater, and she needs it in the next 4 hours, or we're going to lose her. I understand what I need, Elise said quietly. The surgeon looked at her. What I need right now, she continued, is 5 minutes with this man. Ma'am, I'm not authorized to clear the room during trauma response. 2 minutes, then you can do whatever you need to do. The surgeon stepped back with the expression of a man who had argued with patients before and knew which arguments were worth having. He nodded to the nurses, and they moved to the far end of the room, maintaining professional proximity without being in earshot. Bradstone moved to her side. Elise's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They're going to run my rifle. When they find the body on the ridge, they are going to run the ballistics, and they're going to know the round came from this barrel. I know. And when they run this barrel, they're going to find a file. There's a file, Bradstone. Someone built it. Someone above your pay grade built a file on Orchid, and some of what's in that file is accurate, and most of what's in it is not. She paused to breathe, careful, measured, each breath costing her something. The part that matters is that there are people who would prefer I stayed in that snow depression. The statement landed with the weight of something she had been carrying for a long time. Who shot you? Bradstone asked. She looked at him. His name was Voss, German national, but he'd been working for a private contractor out of Prague for the past 3 years. The 14 kills command attributed to Orchid, 6 of them were Voss. The intelligence got confused because we were working the same theaters, and command assumed one shooter. And the other 8, mine, she said simply, sanctioned, every one of them. Sanctioned by who? The pause was the answer, then carefully, people who are now very interested in whether I'm going to wake up from surgery and talk to someone. Bradstone straightened. He felt something settle in his chest. Not fear, not anger. A kind of cold clarity that arrived when a situation stripped itself down to its actual structure. You're saying whoever sent us after you didn't send us after Voss, even though Voss was the problem? Yes. They sent us after you because you knew too much about who Voss was working for. She held his gaze, said nothing, which was its own confirmation. Bradstone stood in the humming silence of the medical bay and thought about the colonel at 0400 hours. The photograph, the short briefing, find her, neutralize her, come home. He thought about all the things that briefing had not included and now understood why. What do you need from me? He asked. Don't let them take the rifle. Whatever happens in that surgery, whatever they tell you about evidence procedures or ordnance protocol, that rifle doesn't leave your custody. If it does, everything in it disappears and I'm just a body they found in the snow. There's a record in the rifle, in the stock. Cavity behind the cheek piece, field drive. Her eyes didn't waver. 14 months of documentation. Names, dates, coordinates, financial transfers. Voss was the trigger. Someone else was the money. The door opened. The major was there, and apparently 15 minutes had been negotiated down without Bradstone's participation. Lieutenant Commander, I won't ask again. Bradstone looked at Elise. She gave the smallest possible nod. The nod of someone who has just handed off the only thing of value they have left and is trusting a stranger with it for reasons that are not entirely rational and knows it. He turned and walked out with the major. Behind him, the surgeon was already moving back in. The debrief room was small and recorded. Bradstone knew it was recorded because they always were, and because the major had made no effort to tell him it wasn't, which meant either honesty or a very specific kind of trap. He sat down across from the major and a woman he didn't recognize who had been introduced only as Langley liaison, in a tone that suggested further specification was not on offer. Andrea Carver. The name came back to him from somewhere in Elise's whispered briefing. 19 years with the agency, 4 years running a joint operational program, the liaison for black site elimination work, the person who had probably sent them after Elise in the first place. Walk me through the contact, the major said. Bradstone walked him through it. He chose his words the way a man chooses footing on uncertain ice. Each one tested before committing weight. He described the blood trail, the depression, the woman, the thermal decoy on the 11 o'clock ridge, the actual shooter on the east ridge. He described the shot. He used the number. He watched both of them process it and fail. 4,500 meters, the Langley woman said. Not a question, a repetition as if saying it again would make it make sense. And 43, Bradstone said. She wrote something down. The major looked at his hands briefly, which was the involuntary gesture of a man trying to recalibrate his understanding of what was possible. And the shooter, the major said, you have no additional identification. We have a body on the East Ridge at approximately 4.5 kilometers. Recovery team will need 2 days minimum with the weather. But the shot came from... The major started, then stopped. He had done the math. He understood what he was about to say, and he understood that saying it created a problem he didn't want. From our position in the depression, Bradstone said helpfully, where I and my team were taking cover during the engagement. The major looked at him for a long moment. Lieutenant Commander, the threat was neutralized. Yes, sir. The mission objective was achieved. My team is intact. He kept his voice even. Bureaucratic. The tone of a man filing a routine report. Is there a specific aspect of the after action you'd like me to expand on? The Langley woman's pen had stopped moving. She was watching him with an expression that was not hostile and not friendly and contained a significant amount of intelligence assessment. The woman, she said, orchid, status, critical but stable, in surgery as of 30 minutes ago. And her weapons system, Bradstone looked at her, currently in my custody pending ordnance review. That weapon should be transferred to intelligence analysis immediately for pending ordnance review, he said again. Flat, final. The silence in the room had texture. The major was looking at the Langley woman, and the Langley woman was looking at Bradstone, and Bradstone was looking at a point on the wall slightly above both of them, which was the posture of a man who had made a decision and was comfortable with it. We'll continue this after the surgery, the Langley woman said. Of course, Bradstone said. He went to his team. They were in the transit room waiting for him. 4 cots, a folding table, the remains of a meal that had been brought and largely ignored. Thornfield was cleaning his optics with the methodical attention of someone who needed something to do with his hands. Kowalski was asleep, the instant total unconsciousness that only soldiers managed. Rutherford was staring at the ceiling. Holt was sitting with his hands open in his lap, not reading anything, not doing anything, which for him was notable. Rutherford, Bradstone said, yeah. I need eyes on the medical wing. Discreet. Rutherford sat up. He didn't ask why. How long? Until she comes out of surgery, or I tell you otherwise. Rutherford was on his feet and out the door in the time it took Bradstone to cross to where Thornfield was working. Thornfield looked up from the optics. I need to know everything you can find about a contractor named Voss. German National Private Security Prague, based last 3 years, operating in the same theaters as Orchid. Thornfield put the optics down. You want me running that on base systems? No, personal kit, encrypted, nothing that touches the base network. Thornfield picked up his personal device from his jacket without another word and started working. Bradstone sat on the edge of an empty cot and carefully set the rifle down beside him. He had kept it with him since the helicopter strapped to his rig because Elise had asked him not to let it go. And he had decided that whatever was happening here, whatever conspiracy had wrapped itself around a woman who made impossible shots and carried 14 months of documentation in her chest pocket, he was going to see it through. The rifle was cold, still carrying the temperature from outside. He turned it in his hands, not examining it exactly, but feeling the weight of it, the reality of it. This was the rifle that had made a shot at 4,543 meters through a wound that should have made conscious thought impossible. He found the cavity behind the cheek piece. Small, precisely machined. The kind of modification that had been done by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Inside a drive, no bigger than his thumbnail. He didn't remove it. Not yet, but he confirmed it was there. 14 months of someone's life compressed into silicon and stored in a weapon that had just killed the man who had tried to kill her. The universe's sense of irony was getting pronounced. Holt spoke from across the room without moving. She's going to live. Bradstone looked at him. I know that's not information, Holt said. I think she's going to live. The surgeon thinks so too, Bradstone said. Mostly. It's not just that. Holt was quiet for a moment. Someone who made it through what she made it through in that snow. That's not luck. That's something else. He seemed to realize he was about to say something that would invite a theological discussion and adjusted. She wanted to finish it. She held on long enough to finish it. She did, Bradstone said. And now, Bradstone looked at the rifle. Now someone's going to try to take it from her. Thornfield had something in 40 minutes. He came to Bradstone, quietly device in hand, showed him the screen without speaking. Bradstone read, then read again. Voss was real. The Prague contractor was real. But what Thornfield had found through connections Bradstone had never asked about and would continue not asking about was something the mission briefing should have contained and hadn't. Voss had been flagged 14 months ago by a signals intelligence unit as a probable contractor for a European private military group with confirmed ties to 3 of the target deaths command had attributed to Orchid. The flag had been filed. The flag had not been acted on. The flag had been buried by someone in the intelligence pipeline with the clearance to bury it. Bradstone stared at the screen. Who buried it? Thornfield pointed to an identifier code. I can't get a name off base systems, but the code is a liaison identifier, someone with joint operational access. Liaison. The Langley woman's title came back to him. He didn't say it out loud, neither did Thornfield, but they were looking at each other in the particular way that meant they'd arrived at the same place independently. How solid is this? Bradstone asked. Solid enough to be dangerous, Thornfield said. Not solid enough to be safe, which was exactly the problem. It was the kind of information that protected you if you could deploy it correctly and destroyed you if you couldn't. Keep it, Bradstone said. Encrypted. Off network. Don't tell the others yet. Thornfield pocketed the device. What's the play? Bradstone looked at the door to the transit room, beyond which the corridor led to the medical wing, where a woman was on a surgical table, and beyond that a debrief room where a major and a Langley liaison were revising their approach. She comes out of that surgery and they're going to move fast. They're going to want the rifle, and they're going to want her in a transfer before I can do anything about it. So we move faster. We move smarter. Bradstone stood. Get Rutherford on comms. The moment she's out of surgery, I want to know before that major does. Thornfield was already moving. Rutherford's voice came through the earpiece at 0931 hours. 3 words. She's out. Recovery. Bradstone was moving before the 3rd word finished. He had the rifle slung across his back, Thornfield 2 steps behind him, and he was doing the math on how much time they had before the major and the Langley woman made their own move. The answer was not much. Possibly none. The corridor between the transit room and the medical wing was 60 meters. He covered it at a pace that was professional but unmistakably purposeful. The surgeon met him at the recovery room door with the expression of a man who had been awake for too long and had made peace with most things, but not all of them. She's stable, he said. Genuinely stable this time. The surgery went honestly, it went better than it had any right to. Can she talk? She's been talking since she came out of anesthesia. He said it with the flat wonder of someone reporting something they'd observed but not fully processed. I told her she needed to rest. She asked me what her current blood pressure was, and when I told her, she said, and I'm quoting, then I can talk. Bradstone almost smiled. Almost. He pushed past the surgeon into the recovery room. Rutherford fell in behind him from where he'd been posted near the far wall. The first thing Bradstone saw was Elise upright, the bed cranked to 45 degrees, the IV still running, color still wrong, but less wrong than it had been. Eyes tracking him from the moment the door opened. "They're coming," she said before he said anything. "Probably 5 minutes behind me." "The woman from Langley." "Yes. Her name is Carver, Andrea Carver. She's been with the agency for 19 years. For the last 4, she's been the liaison for a joint operational program that was running Voss as an unofficial contractor for black site elimination work." Elise paused, each word measured. "Work that couldn't be sanctioned through normal channels because the targets weren't hostile foreign nationals. Some of them were ours." The room was very quiet. Rutherford near the wall had gone completely still. "She buried the signals flag on Voss," Bradstone said. "She generated the file on Orchid," Elise said. "The file that sent you after me. She needed Voss's loose end cleaned up, and she needed me gone before I could surface what I documented." Her voice was steady. "The kind of steady that costs something. She used your team to do both." Bradstone looked at Thornfield. Thornfield was already on the device confirming cross-referencing, building the case in real time. "The field drive," Bradstone said. He unslung the rifle and held it out to her. She took it. Her hands were slower than they'd been in the field. The surgery, the blood loss, the anesthesia still working its way out. But the motion was the same. The rifle settled into her grip like something returning to its natural state. She turned it, located the cavity behind the cheek piece without looking, and pressed the release with her thumbnail. A small flat drive dropped into her palm. She held it up. Everything. 14 months. Every name, every payment, every target, Voss's handler chain, all the way back to the contracting entity, and from there to the individuals inside the agency who were funding it. She looked at Bradstone. "This is why she needed me dead. Not because of what I'd done, because of what I know." He took the drive. It was smaller than he expected. The weight of something that could end careers, end programs, and the professional lives of people who had spent decades building the architecture to protect those careers. And it weighed almost nothing. "Who do I give this to?" he asked. "Not Carver. Not anyone Carver can reach before it gets into the right hands. You need someone outside the operational chain. Inspector General, or—" The door opened. It was the major. He came in first, which meant Carver had sent him ahead, which meant Carver was making a calculation about optics. How it looked for a Langley liaison to personally walk into a recovery room and demand evidence from a surgical patient. The major was the buffer, the acceptable face. "Lieutenant Commander," the major said, "I need you to step out. I'm in the middle of a medical debrief. The patient has information relevant to the mission after action. This isn't—" She identified the shooter. She identified his method and his position, and she provided tactical direction that enabled the neutralization of the threat. That's a material witness debrief, and it takes priority over administrative transfer protocols. The major's voice had dropped. He wasn't performing anymore. He was talking to Bradstone directly, man to man, and there was something in his eyes that was either a warning or a request. "Step outside with me, please." Bradstone looked at Elise. She gave him the smallest nod. He handed the drive to Thornfield with a motion he kept at his side, low shielded by his body. Thornfield pocketed it without changing his expression. Bradstone followed the major into the corridor. Carver was there. She looked exactly as he'd expected. Composed. Unremarkable. The professional blankness of someone who spent their career in rooms where everything said was simultaneously true and incomplete. "Lieutenant Commander Bradstone," she said, "you've done remarkable work tonight. Your team should be proud. Thank you. I'd like to take custody of the patient's weapon system for ballistics analysis. Standard protocol for any engagement where the discharge record is relevant to the after action. I've already initiated the ordnance review process. The weapon is logged under my custody number. Transferring it before the review is complete would create a chain of custody issue." Carver looked at him. The composure didn't shift, but something behind it did. A minute recalibration. The look of someone updating their model of the obstacle in front of them. "There's some flexibility in that protocol," she said. "I prefer not to use it," he said. The silence between them was the kind that contained an entire conversation that neither of them was going to have out loud. She knew he knew something. He knew she knew he knew something. The major was standing 2 feet away, pretending to look at the wall, which was the posture of a man who had just understood he was standing in the middle of something much larger than he'd been told. "The patient," Carver said. "She'll be transferred to a secure medical facility within—" "She's post-surgical. The surgeon has medical authority over patient transfer for a minimum of 72 hours. That's not protocol flexibility." That's medical law. There are national security provisions that supersede. I'd like to see the written authorization, signed and dated, before any transfer. Carver looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "We'll continue this conversation shortly," and walked away down the corridor with the unhurried pace of someone who has decided to approach from a different angle. The major waited until she was gone. Then he turned to Bradstone and said very quietly, "Whatever you have, you need to move it faster than she does." Bradstone looked at him. "What? I've been at this base for 11 months. I've seen 3 operations run through here where the after action didn't match what came in on the helicopter. Each time Carver or someone like Carver showed up within the hour. Each time the version that went into the official report was not the version I watched arrive." His jaw was tight. "I don't know what's on that drive, and I don't want to know, but I know she wants it, and I know why people like her want things. And I'm telling you, whatever you're doing, do it now." Bradstone stared at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I have a daughter," the major said. Like that was a complete answer. He held Bradstone's gaze for one more second, then walked away in the opposite direction from Carver and didn't look back. Bradstone was back in the recovery room in 30 seconds. Thornfield looked at him. Bradstone looked at Elise. "We have a window. It's short." "How short?" "She's going to come back with paper. Signed, dated, whatever she needs to make the transfer look legitimate. An hour, maybe less." Elise was already thinking. He could see it. The same internal processing that had happened in the snow when she was calculating the shot. The same quality of focus, just directed at a different problem. The drive needs to leave this base through a channel Carver doesn't control. Diplomatic pouch would work, but you don't have access. Personal device with encrypted transmission to a verified external contact. "I've got a contact," Thornfield said. "Judge Advocate General's office. She's cleared for classified and she's not in the operational chain. Legal division, completely separate from anything Carver could have touched. Can you reach her right now?" "I can reach her in 10 minutes if the base comms aren't filtered." "Use your personal connection, not base comms." "Already on it." Elise watched Thornfield work. Then she looked at Bradstone and something shifted in her face. Not dramatically, not sentimentally, just a recognition of a reality she had apparently not expected to encounter. "You're risking a significant amount," she said. "So are you. I chose this 14 months ago. You had no choice until 6 hours ago. I made my choice when I grabbed your wrist in the snow. Everything after that is the same choice." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away, not from discomfort, but the way a person looks away when something hits a place they don't usually let things reach. "There's a name on that drive, above Carver, one level above her. You need to know it before the drive leaves this room. Because if something goes wrong, if the transmission fails, if Thornfield's contact can't act fast enough, that name is the one thing worth remembering." She told him. He recognized it. That was the worst part, not a stranger. Not an abstraction. A name he had heard in briefings, had seen attached to commendations, had been told at some point in the architecture of his career, represented exactly the kind of institutional integrity the whole structure was supposed to be built on. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. "Yeah," Elise said, reading his face. "I know." Thornfield got through to the JAG contact at 10:08 hours. He moved to the far corner of the room and spoke in the low, rapid shorthand of someone delivering information that needs to land intact and fast. Bradstone positioned himself near the door and thought about all the moving pieces and what order they needed to fall in. Rutherford came close. "She's going to try to get the patient out before the transmission completes," he said quietly. "That's what I do." "I know, so what do we do?" Bradstone thought about it. "Kowalski, get him up and get him to the main corridor junction between here and the admin wing. He doesn't stop anyone. He doesn't engage anyone. He just stands there and he lets me know the moment he sees Carver or anyone moving with paperwork." Rutherford was gone. Bradstone turned back to the room. Thornfield had been talking for 4 minutes. His voice had shifted. Still low, still compressed, but with a slight change in cadence that meant the person on the other end was asking questions and the answers mattered. He looked at Bradstone over the device and gave a single nod. The contact had the information. The contact was moving. The next 8 minutes were the longest Bradstone had spent standing still in recent memory. Elise had closed her eyes, but he didn't think she was sleeping. The surgeon had come in, briefly checked vitals, looked at Bradstone with an expression that suggested he knew something irregular was happening, but had decided it wasn't his problem, as long as the patient's pressure stayed stable. At the 6-minute mark, Kowalski's voice came through the earpiece. Bradstone, 3 people, admin corridor. One of them is the woman from Langley. One of them is in uniform, I don't have the rank. The third is carrying a folder. Folder meant paperwork. She'd moved faster than an hour. Thornfield, Bradstone said. 90 seconds. She needs 90 seconds to confirm receipt. 90 seconds. 3 people with paperwork 60 meters away. Kowalski sawing, Bradstone kept his voice flat. Drop your coffee. A pause. Then from down the corridor, the sound of a metal cup hitting tile floor, and Kowalski's voice raised in exaggerated frustration and the additional sound of someone needing to go around him. Not a large delay, but a real one. 70 seconds. The surgeon looked at Bradstone. Said nothing. Elise opened her eyes. She was watching the door. 50 seconds. Thornfield said, come on, to no one and to the device simultaneously. Footsteps in the corridor. Closer. 30 seconds. The door handle moved. Confirmed, Thornfield said. She has it. It's transmitted. She's filing for emergency review. The door opened. Carver walked in. Behind her, the uniformed officer a Colonel Bradstone saw now, and not one he recognized. Behind him, a man with a folder who was already opening it. Carver looked at Bradstone, looked at Thornfield, who was pocketing his device with the measured unhurry of someone who had just finished a completely ordinary phone call. Looked at Elise in the bed. I have authorization for patient transfer and evidence seizure, she said. All right, Bradstone said. She blinked. That was not what she had expected. Show me the paperwork, and we'll follow whatever process it specifies. He kept his voice completely neutral, the voice of a man with nothing to hide and nothing to protect because there was nothing left to protect. But I'd like my JAG representative present for the transfer. She was just briefed on the case, and she's already filed for emergency review of the authorization chain. He tilted his head slightly. Standard process. The folder in the aide's hands was open. Carver hadn't taken her eyes off Bradstone's face. She was reading him the way a person reads a situation that has changed while they were in the other room, trying to locate exactly where the change happened and what it means. JAG review takes 48 hours minimum, she said. Usually, Bradstone agreed. Unless they have something that warrants expedited consideration, Thornfield said helpfully from the corner. The silence in the room was enormous. The colonel behind Carver shifted his weight. The aide with the folder looked at no one. Elise watched from the bed with the same still attention she'd given the East Ridge. She did not speak. She didn't need to. She had done her part 14 months ago. In the cold. In the snow. At a distance no one had believed possible. And now it was in other hands. And she was watching to see what those hands would do with it. Carver took the paperwork from the folder. She looked at it. Then she looked at Bradstone one last time with an expression he would think about later. Not rage, not fear. Something more like the look of someone watching the last exit on a road they've driven for years close off in front of them. She put the paperwork back in the folder. We'll wait for the JAG review, she said. Then she turned and walked out. The colonel followed. The aide followed. The door swung shut. The room exhaled. Rutherford said quietly, I don't know exactly what just happened. Yes, you do, Thornfield said. Bradstone sat down on the edge of the empty chair near the bed. His hands were steady. They were always steady until the moment they didn't need to be. And then the steadiness went somewhere else and left a tiredness behind it that he'd learned to accept as the natural cost of things. He looked at Elise. She was looking back at him with those dark, focused eyes, and for the first time since he'd found her face down in the snow, something in them had changed. The calculation was still there, but underneath it finally something that looked like rest. It's moving, she asked. It's moving, he said. She nodded once, then she closed her eyes, and this time he thought she actually slept.